Hello.
Oh, look at that. They gave us mics. Nice. Look, we got the mic stands too.
Yes.
Thank you for the mic stands.
Do you want to do this or do you want to do Unravel? What do you think?
I'm missing Unravel. So maybe we could do a little bit of that too.
Sounds like a little bit band.
I think so.
Okay. I think we're ready to begin. This is about a half hour, I think. Maybe a little more, but.
Don't you know never to say that out loud?
So just want to explain what we're going to do. There is a tradition, there are two traditions really on Yom Kippur that this afternoon is trying to uphold. The first one is to have a kind of conversation that has to do with some contemporary issue that's going on. And we like to tie it to whatever the theme is, and that's why we had Dr. Trudy Goodman, who was brought in, I thought, some really incredible meditations about kindness, and hopefully you enjoyed that. So now, one of the other traditions is to read the book of Jonah, which is, if you've ever read it, it's not a long book, but it has some really, really fascinating concepts and ideas. It's a little bit dry just to kind of read it. So what we have here, I guess we've been developing this for, I'd say maybe 5 or 6 years. During the pandemic, we didn't do this at all. So there were 2 or 3 years where we didn't do this. Have you guys read it each time we've done it? I think there's some combination of these actors. So let's give little Jake Broder. This is Jake Broder, everyone. This is Melissa Greenspan, everyone. This is Lucy Davenport, everyone. And this is, in this context, Michelle Azar, member of Actors Equity Union, as they all are, I believe. We're doing this under an equity contract because SAG-AFTRA would be really difficult to do it. And we're happy to say that there was an agreement reached with the Writers Guild.
Yes, that's a big jazz
And
hand.
we've been talking up here that we think it was because of my sermon last week, that someone heard it and said, yes, we will treat our writers with kindness.
That is true.
The Yom Kippur was it?
real.
Well, you know, if you start to think about it, right. So here's the way this is going to work. This is kind of a combination of a dramatic reading and contemplative thought. So what we're going to do is we're going to read through the story. Actually, they're going to read for us. And then we're going to stop here and there, and I'm just going to, from my seat, I'm not going to get up, just throw out some questions. Give us a minute or two to think about them, and then we're going to keep on going on with the story. So it's not just that we hear the story of Jonah, but try to relate to it in some way through our own lives and what's happening inside of our own lives. Also, I hope that you have just kind of a new way to hear this story. If you're familiar with it, hopefully there'll be some kind of wrinkles in the way that the story is presented. So without further ado, the book of Jonah.
This is a story about a prophet.
A reluctant prophet.
His name was Jonah.
He was asked to reverse the fate of a city with sinners. A city with sinners from end to end. Nineveh was as big as any city of the day, and the sinners' sins were the sinful array in the city of Nineveh.
God asked him to go and asked them to change. Give them time to change their ways. But Jonah didn't believe they would or could change. Why would they change? How could they change if they always act this way?
They were murderers and cheats and stealers, and worse, they spent their lives chasing greed and each other. They ate their time with atrocities against their brother. There's no need to change. They don't want to change. How could he ever change them?
Into the sea. Jonah went in the other direction, away from the sinners, but sinning himself by hiding from God. Where was his love for humanity? Where was his love for those people? In the same place where it was found yesterday. He convinced himself to go to the sea, into the Mediterranean, to people in a city who were afraid to sin against God, the city of Tarshish, a city with people not like the Ninevites who choked each other and bit the hand that warmed their nights. He convinced himself to go out to the sea.
Where he wouldn't be found.
Where he couldn't be heard.
Where he can escape his duty.
He convinced himself to go out to sea, into the Mediterranean. So he hopped on a boat with some idol worship sailors to Tarshish.
It's very easy to locate Jonah. He's on his way to Tarshish. But where are you? Now's the time to locate yourself. What is your now? Are you running from something? Are you running to something? Are you lounging in a chair while everyone else is running? Find your now.
Cannot run, cannot hide. He lay in the belly of the boat. A storm raged above on deck. The sailors were praying to no avail. The storm raged as if their prayers were to the wrong gods. How odd was this? Jonah the sleeper, eyes closed to the truth of the storm. How did Jonah sleep as the boat tossed and turned and all the sailors cried,
Get yourself on deck and pray to your God.
Jonah knew better than to open his mouth with prayers to his God. They would not suffice.
Throw me overboard, and the storm will stop, and I will be alone in the sea with my God, with my fate, and you will have each other to offer to your gods another night.
The sailors closed their eyes and threw him to his death. And as the waves caught him, they saw him disappear.
To the deep.
To the dark.
Into the waves.
And the storm stopped. A calm took over the sea.
The sailors bowed and became believers. And Jonah bobbed for a moment and floated and sank and floated and then hovered just under the surface of the deep.
In the fish, Jonah stared up from under the sea. The stars peered down from the sky, and Jonah felt nothing but the end of his life. It was near. He knew. And he thought that he deserved the fate that was ahead of him. But out of the deep came the largest of its kind, a fish like no other, created for a purpose, a mouth opened wide to swallow him whole. The prophet Jonah, who escaped from the land, who was thrown to the sea, was now living in a living cave, a haven in the deep, a home in the depths of the belly of a fish.
To wait.
To think.
To exist.
For 3 days.
For 72 hours.
Alone.
Alive.
To wait.
To think.
To contemplate his fate.
His existence.
His mission.
His life.
After 3 days' time, the fish spit him out. He flew like a bird. With a water comet tail, he came to rest on the edge of a continent.
He raised his eyes.
He saw his future.
He saw his life.
He saw his way.
He saw.
He went.
Jonah had to sink into the sea in order to understand that he had no choice but to go to where God told him to go. Are you still in the belly of a big fish waiting for your light? Have you figured out what you do need to do? Is there nothing to figure out at all? Have you been running from something? But you know you have to do it. It's no longer about where you are. It's where you're going. Or if you are deep down inside the sea, inside the belly of a fish, how in the world are you going to get out of that thing?
Failure or success. Jonah was alive. He survived. The trauma of the sea was behind him. He went forward on foot, miles and miles, with a goal in mind, with a goal in sight. He strutted through the desert like he had somewhere to go. And his mind filled with success, and his heart filled with pride about his mission to Nineveh.
They lived with excess.
They disregarded law.
They cavorted through town.
They were barely human.
His mind went on and on, how he would warn, how he would inform them that they would die in 40 days' time. He amused himself, like a muse in his mind, these stubborn people, staring into death as death stares right back, one by one. He'd see them pass, their last breath like a mist painting the sky. He arrived at the scene, one day's walk through the city, and stood up proud and pronounced to the crowd,
40 days more, and Nineveh will be overthrown.
there. He had done it. There. He had said it. Success was at hand. But now, he had to wait.
He had to wait.
Wait.
Waiting
How long did he have to wait?
for God to strike.
Just
40 days and nights.
He can't wait. Wait to see the moment he would become a prophet.
Turn, turn, turn. The wretched,
The corrupt.
The sinful.
the
Ninevites.
They believed God.
What?
The king was full of remorse, asked everyone to change their course.
Every day they turned. For 40 days they yearned for God to relent the decree, and they pleaded for compassion, and they prayed for liberation, and they saw the future was as dark as darkness could be.
Yeah. We missed a page.
We did.
The king was full of remorse, asked everyone to change their course, change their lives. They stopped eating. They put on sackcloth. They changed the course of their lives. They turned themselves into something else. They heeded the call to one and to all, afraid to be the victims of a vengeful God.
Have mercy on us!
They cried.
Be like the God of Abraham, who turned back the call to sacrifice his son.
We are your sons and your daughters,
and we see that we have been evil.
We
can be better.
And they turned and became more human, became softer and warmer, and became responsible for each other.
Every day they turned. For 40 days they yearned for God to relent the decree, and they pleaded for compassion, and they prayed for liberation, and they saw the future. It was as dark as darkness could be. God peered into their hearts and saw truth and love and pain. A veil was lifted from the evil of their past. At last, God relented and took back the plan of destruction and death. Nineveh would not be like Sodom and Gomorrah.
Jonah was upset.
Jonah was grieved.
Jonah was a failure.
Was anything but relieved.
He promised pain. He promised death. How could he show his face without being mocked?
As a fake.
As a phony.
As a prophet, not worth his word. He scowled. He pouted. He thought, how absurd.
Jonah was not very happy with the way things are turning out. The people were supposed to die, weren't they? I'll give him this. He had an ideal future. He knew what he wanted. Got a little snippy when it didn't go his way. So let's take a few moments to think about our ideal future. What would that look like for you? Where would you be in your ideal future? With whom would you be in your ideal future, and what would it look like?
Why do you care? Jonah knew in the back of his mind that God was gracious, that God was filled with kindness, and that's why he ran and fled to Tarshish. This was a job doomed from the start, and now he was a fraud, he thought, and couldn't show his face. He pleaded and prayed to die with haste rather than live with disgrace.
Are you this upset, Jonah, that they lived? Are you grieved for the lives saved? Or are you anguished that they are no longer depraved beings, but human beings again?
Jonah fled once more and took up on a hill. He built a sukkah to rest and regroup, to see what will happen now that he was wrong.
While he rested, God gave him a gift, a gourd, a growing plant for shade and for thought. Jonah loved the fruit. He loved the plant. He stopped thinking for a moment about all he had planned and instead basked in the shade of God's creation.
Finding peace in his heart.
finding comfort.
finding sleep.
When he awoke, the gourd was gone.
He had nothing
to do with its life. He
had
had nothing to do with its
death.
death.
The sun scorched his face, red and burning. He realized that everything he thought was true and real was ephemeral at best and temporary at worst. And so was he, becoming faint and woozy. He reacted as people do with pain and suffering over the loss of his gift.
He pleaded again for his life to end.
He couldn't go on. He couldn't pretend.
Life had no meaning without the gourd.
Epilogue. God held Jonah in God's palm and caressed him with words in the center of his mind.
So much pain you felt for yourself on account of the gourd.
God said.
Yet you had nothing to do with its existence.
You didn't plant it.
You didn't care for it.
You didn't destroy it.
You had no connection to it.
There are 120,000 human souls in the city who came to life through my own breath.
My creations, my children, who knew not their right from their left.
Who knew not the difference between themselves and the beasts. Should I not care for them? Should I not nurture them? Should I not desire for them to be kind to each other?
What are we left with when we realize, as Jonah had to realize, that we don't have control that we would like to have over anything? We make plans, but they only belong to us. And we can only do what we think is right, and sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't. Today, all day, has been about the uncertainty of life. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. Never mind one quest, never mind our entire journey on this planet. For today, we will only ask for two things. As we go through our everyday life's journey, filled with tasks we want to do, and filled with Jonah tasks, ones we don't want to do. We're going to ask for the blessing that the hands above the ark in front of all of us are calling. The first line of the priestly benediction. If we can have these two things in our hearts, we can weather any storm, any gourd, any one. So if you can close your eyes just for a moment, or keep them really heavy but open. I want you in your mind to ask yourself these two things. And just repeat them to yourself. May I feel blessed. And may I feel safe. May I feel blessed. And may I feel safe. May I feel blessed. May I feel safe. That's the end of our story. I'd like to thank our incredible actors for being with us today, giving them our little fingers. Thank you so much for the beautiful job.
I finally understood why we read Jonah today.
Right?
Finally.
Well,
Quite special.
It didn't go till 5:30, so we do have time now. If people would like to just schmooze amongst themselves, hang around. Anyone have any questions or anything about the story? I'd be glad to answer them. Corned beef sandwich at 7:15. Had anyone not ever heard the Jonah story before? Was this anyone's first time hearing it? Wonderful. And your son's named Jonah? That's actually quite funny. Was there a hand back here? Yeah. First time also. That's wonderful. Yeah.
I have a question.
You have a question.
I think many of us were familiar with the story. We're hearing it in
Oh, it's not on?
we were hearing it in new words.
8. You were hearing a story in new words, yeah.
I was commenting that while most of us were very familiar with the story, this was a new version and beautifully written, as well as beautifully acted. And I wondered whose version is this?
It's my version. That's my kind of spoken word for it, yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Bravo.
Thank you. You know, it didn't feel as it was hard to get into the story, right? Accessible. And so I wanted to kind of make it to understand. Also, it's hard to, you don't get any of the context of how Jonah felt or what he was doing or why he would do things. So this just kind of filled that in a little bit.
So I think I finally understood the story, as I was saying earlier, and I think in a way it could be that we are both Jonah and the people of Nineveh. Yeah. So on Yom Kippur, we want to do all these things. We fast, we pray, and we want to be better. But then we're still Jonah, like, I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know. So that's it helped me understand that this is a great way to look. I never figured out why.
That's really helpful,
it was
though,
here.
that we are both Jonah and the Ninevites, right? It's like we do need to turn somehow and we need to bring ourselves to a new place. But also there's all these things that we don't want to do, that we're trying to stay away from, we're trying to hide from. And they're both doing that, right? And they had to come together. But what struck me the most about it is when we were in rabbinical school and we took a prophets class, the first day the teacher's like, how do you know when someone's a prophet? And the answer is, what they say comes true. Right? If they could say whatever they want. If it doesn't come true, they're not a prophet, right? So there's Jonah. In some ways, I don't even think he wanted to be a prophet. He didn't want it to come true. He wanted them to, if they had been killed, he would have been proven correct, right? So he feels like he failed when the fact is he's the greatest prophet of all. He told them what was going to happen. They changed their ways. He caused change in the world, and how amazing that is. But I'm not sure he sees that. So he's a reluctant prophet. So in about 15, 20 minutes, we'll open up the ark. People will have an opportunity to go back there. But for now, just talk.